Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today's video is going to be a skill building project with the spindle gouge. I'll show you a bunch of different cuts and practice things we can do to increase your ability with the spindle gouge. These are cuts and skills that are crucial to every woodturner, and I'll show you some of the different ways we can practice those cuts so that way when you go to your next project, you're ready for it. It's a fun way to get out in the shop and practice cuts, experiment with different shapes and profiles as well on spindles if you're doing spindle projects. And if this is your first time to our channel, we have a bunch of more wood turning videos available, so go ahead and subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. But let's get turning. So I have an inch and a half by 12 piece of maple that we'll be doing our practice cuts on. I've got it mounted between centers, and let's get this thing to round. Alright, so before we start turning, I've got our blank mounted between centers. I've got my tool rest set up right now. First thing we need to do is get this piece to round, and I'll be using the skew to do that. And then we'll pretty much be using the spindle gouge exclusively. And this is basically just to practice our skills with the spindle gouge, learn how to use this thing very efficiently, and practice our cuts so that when we go to use it on a project, we know exactly what cuts to make and how to make them. So let's turn our lathe on. We'll be turning this about 2200 RPM, and we'll turn this to round. So we'll be using the skew for some peeling cuts, so I like to leave the handle low. We'll engage the bevel and then lift. This is just a quick way to get the corners off of our blank. And it's an arcing action, so I start with that handle low and then I lift the handle and then arc into our cut. Now we can bring our tool rest in just a little bit closer, and now we can do some planing cuts to get this nice and smooth and straight across. We can check for round by resting our tool, and if it's skipping like that, we still have some flat spots on our blank. Alright, we're pretty close to round. And typically what we do in our 101 beginner class in our workshop is we'll do a bead and cove stick where we mark out a bunch of beads and do coves. So we'll have a bead and then a cove, and it alternates across the piece. That's a really good skill building piece to do. But I like to incorporate some other shapes into my piece. So I'll do beads, coves, half rounds, fillets, chamfers, some ogee curves. And I like to do a lot of practice shapes like this because you can find out what shapes work well together if you're doing, ballisters or spindle projects where you want some good decoration in there. You can see what curves match and blend well and look really nice. So I like to take the bead and cove stick and kind of elevate that and just practice all these coves or all these shapes and cuts together. So I've got a little bit of tear out here. I'm going to clean this pass. It'll do a cleanup pass here, and then we'll start laying out what we want to do. And then we just kind of freestyle and just start making cuts. We'll do a bead or a cove here, and then we might add a chamfer to it and then just play around with the piece as we practice. Alright, so I'll just sneak up my tool rest just a little bit closer, and we'll start working on this end here. I'll use my skew just to create some little V grooves in here that we can start making our half rounds or our beads out of. And you can do these same cuts with the skew if you want to practice using your skew. But today we'll be focusing primarily on the spindle gouge. So I'm just using the skew to lay out some areas we can start doing some half beads. That'll just give us a little clearance for our tool to start cutting. And with my spindle gouge here, this is a 3/8 and it's got a 35-degree grind on it. A lot of people will run a 40 or 45 degree on their spindle gouges. I like the 35 just because it gives me a longer nose so I can get in there a little bit tighter in those corners and have clearance to make the cut. So play around with your angles on your spindle gouge, see what you like. But for me, I like the 35 for most of the things I do. And with the size of this piece, I'm going to raise my tool rest up just a hair. That way I'm going to be cutting just above center a little bit. That's going to help me make these cuts. And for this, I'm going to start with a half round or a full round here, right here. So I start in the center, and then I start lifting the handle and rotating that tool over. And then I close that flute as soon as I get down into the bottom of that groove. And you can see I've got a pretty nice half round there, and maybe right here we'll do the same on this side. So I start basically flute open, and then I roll that tool over and raise the handle to close that down in the bottom of that V groove we cut. So we've got a really nice half round here. Now let's try and match it on this side. And this is all just practicing fluidity with the tool, getting accustomed to how it's cutting, what motions you need to make with the tool. You know, we start with that flute basically straight up, then we raise the handle and roll it over. And you're just trying to get a really smooth, continuous motion, and that'll leave behind a really clean surface on our piece. So you can see I had that catch there earlier, but I've got a really clean bevel here. Bevel writing cut, you can start sanding out with 320. So we're looking for a nice smooth curve, smooth tool motion, and we're just going to practice these cuts over and over until we're really good at these cuts. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that guy there. Maybe we'll take this half round out and do a little half cove here. Start with that flute closed, and then I swing the handle towards myself. That gives me a nice little half cove there. Nice, that looks pretty good. And now let's do another half round right here. We'll just practice these cuts. I think that looks pretty good. A half round to a half cove to a nice bead. Now let's do, maybe we'll do an ogee right here. Let's see what it does. An ogee shape is this guy right here, where it goes into a cove to a half round. It's a really nice shape. Need to remove some material to give myself access. We'll just do a half round here to give us some clearance. That ogee curve is basically a bell shape. So I pick up the cut, I swing the handle, and then as soon as I start to do that other round, then I bring the handle back to myself and have a really good catch. Nice thing is, this is a practice piece, and that's why we're here to practice. So you get a catch, just cut it away. Pretty happy with that ogee there. Just going to round that over just a little bit more. We'll pick up the cut right here, and then we close that flute as we get down into the bottom. And that catch was, I pushed too hard, so I had that flute closed, and then I was pushing too hard, and it came into this end grain fiber here and cut that bottom wing and just skated out on me and had a pretty good catch. So we'll make this a really nice big half round here. I lift the handle as I get down into the bottom of that cut. That way I'm cutting just on the nose of the tool. If I keep that handle low, I'm not going to get the nose of the tool where I need to be down in the bottom. And that flute's essentially perfectly closed by the time we get down in there. But now we've got a nice bead, a cove, a half round, an ogee, and a big half round there. And I think on the end, maybe we'll do Let's actually step that down and do a little fillet. So I'll use my skew. And then we'll use a slicing cut with our skew. Just to give us a clean shoulder. And maybe we'll do a little teeny bead right here. It's going to be a little tight with the size of this tool, trying to cut into this bead because it's so small. We'll switch hands, get the nose of the tool down in there. There we go. It's not the best bead right there. This tool is just a little bit too big for getting in there to get the clearance I need. Looks kind of cool. Got a nice little cove right there with a bead to a big half round. Now let's start working over here. I'll give myself some clearance with our skew. Just do a little V-cut. And the nice thing is this is just a practice piece. We're just playing with shapes, playing with our tool to see exactly how it's cutting, how we can get better. Practicing these cuts 1,000 times will make you a lot more efficient when you go to do a project. So let's do a little cove right here. I meet up in the center. I start from each side and go down to the bottom of the cove. I end up with the flute basically being open at the bottom of the cut. Let's do a half round here to match. All right, that's a really good half round there. It's nice and tight down in the bottom of this bead. Got a pretty decent cove here. We can tighten that up just a little bit. Make that a little more symmetrical curve. All right, let's do a matching half beat on this side. Give myself some clearance. One thing I want to mention too is my hand position with the tool. So right there I had my fingers on top of the gouge and I could tell it was not letting me move the tool the way I needed to smoothly. You definitely want to keep your hand underneath the tool. You're basically using it like a pool player, just guiding the tool with your support hand here. That way you're allowing that tool to roll through your fingers. That way you can get that smooth continuous motion when you're rolling beads. One of the bigger mistakes we see a lot of new turners is they kind of just bear down on the tool and they try and force their way through the cut. Doesn't allow the tool to move smoothly and easily, and a lot of times that'll lead to a catch or a really ugly shape because you were kind of forcing the tool through the cut. All these cuts are bevel riding, so it'll leave us a nice clean surface. And that bevel support is key, because if you don't have the bevel support, you're gonna have a catch. So you wanna make sure that bevel's rubbing first before you start the cut. And usually what I'll do is I'll contact bevel first, then I'll raise the handle slightly till I start getting shavings off the tool, and then I'll engage that cut. But being able to get a nice rounded bead with your spindle gouge is a really good habit, or a really good skill to have. Because that way when you're doing a spindle project, you know, a rolling pin, pepper mill, you know, these cuts will be second nature to you if you practice these enough. I'm gonna do an ogee here actually. I like the half round we had, but I want to practice my ogee. Just practicing that smooth, fluid motion, getting those movements down. But if we stop the lathe and take a look at the piece, you can see we've got really good surface finishes on there. Obviously I had that catch there, but I'll leave that just as a reminder to myself not to have a catch again. But it leaves a really good surface behind. When you're getting those bevel riding cuts with a sharp tool, it's cutting those fibers very cleanly, and it'll reduce your sanding time. And, you know, honestly, on a piece like this, I'm not going to bother sanding it just because it's a practice piece. But it's cool. You can set it on your shelf and you can mark your progression. You know, if you're new to the hobby and you're practicing these, you know, throw a date on there and say, hey, oh yeah, this is the first time I practiced doing these cuts. And then in a year from now, after you've practiced these a bunch, you'll have your other, you know, your two pieces together, and you can say, hey, wow, I've really made a lot of progress with these cuts. You know, and you can be proud of yourself for having put in the time and effort to practice and get better at the craft. I'll just clean up this end here because it's bugging me a little bit. We'll use my skew now and just put a couple V-grooves in, just to mark where we're going to do some more cuts. Ooh, good skate there. All right, now that I've practiced the ogee this direction a couple times, I've got that motion down. I'm gonna do it this way and try and get that same motion down. So now I need to get some clearance. And again, I've got that tool just kind of loose in my fingers so I can slide it forward, backward, and I can help rotate it as I'm making these cuts to make a fluid transition. Ooh, good catch. So let me show you what happened there. So I was trying to pick up the cut on the inside of this cove here, and I had that fluid open just enough to where it caught this outside wing and just skated back on me because I didn't have the right bevel support for the cut. If that cutting edge isn't supported in any way, it's going to go wherever the wood tells it to go, and it's going to have a catch like that. So you need that bevel contact to make sure the tool stays anchored on the piece as you're making your cut. So I'll just turn that cut away just a hair. And we'll pick that up. I'm going to start and make sure I've got bevel contact before I engage. And I'm not getting it as smooth as I did with the other ogee cuts going the other direction. For some reason it feels a little more comfortable to me doing the cuts this way, but this is why we're practicing, right? That's kind of an ugly ogee. I'm not very happy with it. Yeah, it's definitely not as good of an ogee as I had coming this direction. For some reason, it just feels more natural to me making the cut this way. So we'll practice it again over here. Actually, I think with this shape that we kind of have here, I think it would be kind of cool to do a nice little sphere right in the middle, and then we'll do a kind of a little cove in the middle. I think that'll be kind of sweet. So I'm looking for a nice spherical shape here. We'll try and match that on this side. It's a little bit shorter on this side, but all right, now let's do a tiny little cove right here. One thing worth mentioning as well, even with the long bevel I have on this 35-degree grind, some of these curves might be a little too tight, and that the heel of the tool is going to be in the way. So if you need to, you can grind the heel off and do a double bevel just to give yourself some more clearance, but that's up to you. So right now I have my hand on top of the tool, but I'm still allowing that to freely travel underneath my fingers. I'm just using that just to kind of help support a little bit, but without impeding the progress of the tool. I'm going to do a small peel cut here. Try and do that without hitting my sphere I just cut. Let's do a cove right here. Then we've got this half round to a cove. Ooh, started the cut just in my round there, so we'll back that up a little bit and just clean that surface up. I'll grab my skew and do a slicing cut here on the end grain. So I'll use that skew to give myself a nice clean surface here. And this cove is a little tight for this tool, but we'll do the best we can. Go back in there and do one more slicing cut. And I want to refine this little cove here. It's not as round as I'd like. Just clean that up a hair. Now let's do a half round to a fillet. So I'll step that down. I'll do a slicing cut here on the end grain. Actually, just clean up that corner just a hair, and then we'll do a half round right here. And then I can use that skew to clean that fiber. And the great thing about a piece this size as well is I could keep turning these same cuts where we've already made the cuts and just turn it down smaller and smaller and use this until there's nothing left. So, you know, a piece this size, you could do 1,000 cuts on here or more. Let's do a nice half round here. Actually, we'll do an ogee this direction because I suck at those and I want to practice that some more. And what we could do is an ogee to an ogee and see how that looks and see if that's a shape you want to incorporate in one of your projects. Need to give myself clearance for that tool to go somewhere. So I've got a really nice cove started, and then I'll pick that up to finish that ogee off. Okay, that's looking better than the other one I did over here. Start with your bevel contact, that way you don't have a catch. Ooh, there we go, that's a good looking ogee. Again, I've got that tool nice and loose in my fingers to allow this support hand to guide the tool through the cut and get the rotation and movement I need out of that tool. So we have two different types of ogee here, just two different styles. So we've got a longer, more bell-shaped ogee, and we've got a squattier ogee here. But it's a really good practice because I'm getting a cove, and then I'm getting a half round. So there's quite a lot of tool motion, And if you're looking at the tool handle as it's making the cut, not the cut itself, you can see just how much movement there is in the tool itself. And I don't have that tool anchored to my body, because if I did, then I'd have to move my body a whole lot to make this cut. I kind of free floated out here. I use my support hand to guide that through just like a pool player would. And I'm using this just to stabilize, but not hinder the cut. All right, let's finish off here on this end with a nice little cove to a half round. Ooh, good skate. So I started with that flute just open too much, and I just wanted to skate across the piece. So let's clean that off. And then we'll pick that cut back up, making sure my flute's closed and I've got that bevel support that I need. And then we'll just finish off with a half round here on the bottom. I want to be careful of that 4-prong, because that'll chew that skew up pretty quick. Okay. So you can see we've done a ton of cuts on this piece. We spent about 20 minutes just practicing and refining tool technique. And if you're doing a nice project, it wouldn't hurt to just do something like this before you go and do your project. That way you're up on your tool skills, you knock the rust off, and then you're really smooth with your tool motion and control. But you can see just how pretty the different cuts are. And if you incorporated a lot of these shapes into, different spindle projects, you can do some really pretty things. But the biggest thing with this is we're getting smooth tool control, we're getting clean cuts, nice curves, aesthetically good looking curves, and we're just playing around, having fun, and we're practicing. So get your skew and your spindle gouge out, get some scrap wood, get to your lathe, and just go have some fun and practice. There's nothing really that can go wrong doing this other than a few catches, which you saw I had. But hey, every time you have a catch, you learn something from it, hopefully. And it'll make you a better turner as well. So I always like to do this, once or twice a week. I'll get out and just throw a practice piece up and just get out to the lathe and just have some fun playing around with shapes and cuts, and hopefully getting better in the process. You could see the cuts we did with our skew and spindle gouge, and if there's any tools that you want to see me practice with and give you some ideas on how you can refine your tool skill, leave them in the comments below. But give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more wood turning videos.